Hi, everyone. I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, and theater, and today is absolutely no exception. We're so thrilled to be joined by the wonderful Alain Uy, who is currently starring in the Hulu series Helstrom. And I wanted to start by asking you about your initial audition for the show, because I was so intrigued by the fact that not only did you not know what character you were auditioning for, but you didn't even know what the show was. And so I was really interested in how you approach a self-tape to begin with and kind of figuring out what's the setup going to be, what's the performance going to be when you don't have any feedback in the room, but taking it one step further for this scenario where you literally knew none of the details behind what you were going for.
It's tough. It really was tough. I think for me, my initial reaction with when my reps sent me the audition breakdown was to, you try to glean as much information you can get from the literature that's provided to you. In this instance, it was pretty simple. It was a scene with two friends. And, I just treated it as such. Leading up to the actual audition, I was busy filming another film and we were working 12-hour days and it was an indie and I was the lead in it. And so when I got the audition, I just said to my agent and reps, I was like, I don't have time. There's no way I could really invest a lot of time in this audition. And like any other prepared actor, you want to be able to give it your best and make sure you're present. But I just didn't want to shortchange the process.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't actually do it. I didn't do it. I didn't do a self-tape, and my reps yelled at me and said, look, we don't know exactly what this is, but we feel like it's something that's that could be big. They had some inclination that it was Marvel, that it was a Marvel project, that it was something that was different from what they've been doing prior to this show. So I sat down, finally, I looked at the script and I connected with the truth rather quickly, because it really is about a person who is just looking out for the best interest of the other person. And that other person is a bit of a loose cannon. You can read it off the page immediately. And just finding that truth and finding that love is really the truth of it, and that's it. There's really no magic formula that I kind of went in there. I didn't have anything to they didn't give me anything concrete to research, so it was just human. Like, what is the human interaction between these two people? And it just so happened that the character was Anna, the Anna character. And I just played the truth of it. And I do remember talking to the casting directors after the fact, and they said that out of all the tapes that they submitted or that was submitted, mine was felt the most real and the most human, the most grounded. Maybe that's because I just didn't have time to overthink it, and I just kind of went in. But certainly that audition it felt grounded and it felt real and it felt connected, and I just went with it and submitted it. And then within a few days, they said, we want to test you, and got the test offer, and just waited. And I flew back, through the grace of the producers on that indie film. They allowed me to take a day off. They kind of moved things around so that I could fly to LA, do the test, and audition for it. And but that was great. That was it. And in the test audition, I will say that there is feedback at that point. They will give you some notes and they'll let you know, hey, try this direction and try this tone. And what I found to be really interesting was I played it the same way I played it. And on the corner of my eye, I could see the executive just kind of nodding their head. And then they started throwing me completely different directions. And that's when I kind of knew. I said, okay, they want to see if I could flex, to see what kind of range I could do with this character. And that's where the fun really begins.
Yeah, that's so fantastic to hear that it all kind of flowed in such a natural way. And because you mentioned the tone of the show and how it is a bit darker than a lot of spaces that Marvel's gone before with their shows and with their movies, I wanted to kind of tap into that a little bit and ask you about how the way in which that informed a lot of the character choices that you made. I know you've mentioned that kind of even just reading the very first scene in that very first script gave you a really good sense of it, but was interested in kind of like at what point they communicated or how they communicated to you, this is the tone and approach we're going for, so that you could make character choices based on that.
Yeah, Paul sat me down a week after a few weeks after we closed the deal on the role, and he explained to me explicitly what he was looking for the in terms of the tone of the show. And he gave me comps, like visual comps, like this kind of feels like in the world of Seven, definitely not Seven, but like in that kind of dark, dreary, gloomy kind of feel to it. That he said that there is some comedy to it, but it's really dry wit, and don't lean too far into the comedy because it's just going to be inherent with the characters. And that, just hearing those references, hearing what he visualized and how he saw the series, definitely painted a really specific picture for me. And then from there, it was just asking a ton of questions. What's interesting about this particular show, in comparison to the other shows I've been on, is that the scripts were not available. It's just discussions you have with the writer and the showrunner as to where this can go. And it's not until, I landed in Vancouver and a week before we had to shoot that we actually did a table read. And I had never met the actors. I hadn't met Sidney Lemon. I hadn't met Tom. I hadn't met anybody. So it was an interesting way of casting and an interesting way of putting everything together. But I don't know what it is, but it maybe, Lorraine Mayfield, who casted this thing, has an impressive resume of who and what projects she's casted. So I think instinctually they knew that every actor would vibe in a certain way, because the minute I saw Sid and sat down with her, talk, like it was just immediate, like the quickness and the relationship was immediately there in terms of just the tonal vibe. But going back to your initial question about how to break that down, it started off with Paul, and he was right. The minute I read the script, it put me in that direction of how to read the script in that tone. And from there, like I said, it's just, asking questions and getting the answers that you hope you would get. And then if you don't, you just keep asking questions, and hopefully they paint a really clear picture for you.
I also love that you're bringing up the relationship between your character Chris and Anna on screen, because kind of that's obviously the main crux of where we see him on screen. And it's so interesting to watch, especially hearing you say that you didn't have all of the scripts up front, because the first time that we see them, things are already incredibly complicated. It's not just a regular day in either of their lives.
Right.
We learn a lot of the backstory details later on. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about how much of that backstory and information from their childhood that you had up front, or kind of like how you really just approached those very early scenes where you're going into the complexity of their relationship without necessarily being able to build up the rest on screen for audiences first.
Yeah, that was a conversation that Anna, there you go. I'm so used to calling her Anna now. Sid and I really broke down quickly, is because there was nothing on the paper, on the script, that would really allow or really provide that kind of information, like you said. So they're at an auction house. They own this really, they're a lucrative business, apparently, because they are very well dressed, and really have a taste for the finer things in life. But how did they get there? How did we get there was the prevailing question that I had. And, that information was given to us as soon as, we started, before we shot the project. And understanding the backstory, how much information does Chris know about Anna? Like, how close are they? Does she have any secrets that I might not know about? And those are the things that were really outlined by Paul, that we, grew up or met each other through foster care. And from there, just understanding what the mentality is for someone who may have gone through the system of foster care just made me go into that research of like, what is the personality type that can come out of that? And, fortunately, my sister, who's a social, she works in that field, previewed me to a lot of information as to, some of the psychological things that might occur for someone who might have gone through the system, especially if it's caused by trauma. There's a lot of information, factual things that happened to Chris that hasn't even been explored in the first season, that is slightly touched in the middle of the the series, where there is a bit of a confrontation with Anna and Chris about the why they do what they do, and why there's a line that Chris does not want to cross. And I think that's really a huge turning point for Anna's character, where, you know, there's a moment there where she wants to cross that line, but then has a moment where she's reflective of, oh, wait a minute, I'm actually doing exactly what my father was trying to build me into. And I think that's such a great character thing, and having that information about the foster history between Anna and I really, you know, illustrates that information, that story beat later on. We didn't know that was coming until, you know, 3 days before we read the script on, I think it was episode 7, where we're like, oh, this is where that really, that's there. And, you know, it allowed us to really invest and drop little, you know, connect relationship things that we developed through every scene that we shot together. So I don't know if that answers your question, but but yeah.
No, it absolutely does, like, and very in depth. And I know as well that some of the research elements for you as well, you know, beyond the comic books themselves, was also kind of in terms of just general mythology, and was really fascinated by what you found to be useful in that realm to bring into the show and to bring into your character portrayal.
Yeah, my biggest question was, again, all the information wasn't given to us. So, you know, the one thing that they said to me was that your character, the Chris character, was going to go on a very large arc. We see him initially as a person who is, you know, very much in control, very specific. He knows where everything is. And as you can see in that first episode, where Chris is going into his chamber of goodies, for lack of a better word, you know, he carefully places this axe and notices that there's something different about the room. And that's who Chris is. So, you know, to your question about, you know, that kind of research in the mythology of this world, you know, as the series plays out, oh, there's a keeper demon. Well, that's actually not in the comic books. And so when I talked to Paul about it, I said, how does this fit in with the mythology? And he said, well, it's still within the structure of this world about demons and what is good and evil. And that there is no, you know, there is sometimes the lines are very blurred there. So a keeper in this instance, again, doesn't live in the mythology of the comic books, but still plays within the truth of the story, which is that a demon can also be good and revolt against the bad of the world. And in some ways, that is what Anna and Chris, at least through what's the word I'm looking for? It's the truth of their relationship, like what they do. At least that's what they tell themselves, is that, you know, it's bad to kill people, but killing bad people is kind of a good thing. So it's that dualism that's being played there. But, you know, in terms of research, you know, I consumed so much. I bought, I think, the first 20 issues of The Son of Satan, just to kind of get a sense of where where the idea germinated from. And then from there, you kind of have to let it go and, you know, not have it so that it's such that there is a sense of like that it's left such an impression on you that you can't be flexible. So it's really just understanding what the world is before we, you know, dived into it.
Yeah, there's something that you said in terms of working with the other cast and what your approach is that I loved, where you were mentioning that, you know, on this show, a lot of what you do when you first show up is to just kind of like step back and observe the other cast and how they like to work so that you can kind of fold into that. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that, and if that's something that you kind of walk into every project doing, because every actor comes in with their own style, with their own approach, with their own way of how they like to develop a scene, develop a character, and work collaboratively. So is that something that you've kind of always done, or was there a process of discovery in which you suddenly started to find that to be a really useful tool?
That was definitely a process of discovery for me. You know, it's not often that, you know, you get to work on sets, and just, it's always a privilege to work as an actor. And I've always been a very curious person, a very observant person. And I feel that everyone around me has, you know, I've always felt that there's a different process, a different way of, approaching your craft. And I learned throughout every project that I've done previous to the show that everyone is different and everyone takes direction differently. In fact, I'm always curious to see how they like to be directed or how they like to approach a scene or the day. And the one thing that I in working with someone like Sydney, for example, her approach to being on set is amazing. It's very specific. There's a way in which she gets into the flow of things. She's constantly listening to music and approaching it in that regard. And there's a physicality to some of the things that she does before shooting. And I find that to be amazing. And it's the same thing with Beth, or the same thing with Bob, and understanding what their process is like. Sometimes you go on a set where what scene you're shooting that day. And if it's a heavy scene, there may not be a good time to just have a chit chat with your castmate, because they might be in that moment. And I think understanding and being sensitive to those moments is what's important as a castmate, and understanding that you need to be supportive in that regard. So, even in the opening, the first episode, it's our first day of school. We're nervous like everybody else, even though, yes, we're professional, but still we're very nervous. We're opening ourselves up to everybody else. And it's a very, vulnerable position to be in. And we have to be there for each other. And I just remember, watching Sid and seeing her work on that rooftop, and that opening scene that everybody sees. And I remember taking her out to coffee the next day and just reaffirming her, like, yo, I see where you're going with this thing, and it's badass. And it's hearing that from your castmates, I think, is important to get that kind of support. And she obviously reciprocated that too. But again, just understanding everyone's process is a very important thing. Some people can't read it and some people don't. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, and especially on a show like this, where you're all kind of making such bold and decisive choices in your characters and really kind of pushing the envelope a lot as well. And didn't you also make a musical playlist for Chris as well? And is that something that you genuinely find quite useful with a lot of characters, or was it specific to this one?
Who did your research, man? This is good stuff.
Me.
I did. That's something I learned recently, in the last couple of years. Music has always been something that it's always been a part of me, and I did create a playlist for Chris, and I just wanted to see how it would feel with this character. I did it before on The Passage. I did it on True Detective, and I also did it on a few other projects as well. Some, the characters that had a lot more depth to them. I just wanted to create a musical soundtrack for this person. And even just reading the scripts, I would put, like, at the time, Joker was the film Joker was this, big thing. And Hildur, I can't pronounce her last name, but she's the cellist who did the score for it, was an amazing soundtrack to listen to while reading the script, because it just set the tone for me. But yeah, that's something I think. What's really interesting about the musical thing is that, again, I'm a curious person. So I talked to Robert Wisdom about his process and how he sees the script. And he says, it's funny, I see script as if it's a symphony, and that every character is a specific instrument in the symphony. So maybe someone's a flute, maybe someone's a baritone, saxophone or a cello. There's a bit of a drum character too. And then I asked him, like, so what instrument am I? He's like, oh, you're definitely the flute. I'm like, oh, okay, I could see that. And that's fun. And I also remember meeting Beth for the first time, and we talked about process, because again, I'm a very curious person. And she talked about, she created a soundtrack for the show. And I'm like, holy oh my God, I do the same thing too. And she sent me her Apple playlist that she created for the show. And I'm like, this is awesome. Like this, like some, you know, really hard rock and roll, you know, really kind of like on some Trent Reznor stuff. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So, you know, that was really interesting to exchange, to have an exchange with the other actors and find similarities.
Yeah, I also wanted to ask you a little bit about your production company, Them Too, that you launched back in 2008. Because one of the things I think is so interesting and so great about what you put together is how multidisciplinary it is. You know, you've worked with musicians from the Chainsmokers to Steve Aoki and Avicii. You've also worked on like narrative storytelling. You've worked with a lot of brands from Perrier to Adidas, and was just really interested in kind of like why you wanted to have such a multidisciplinary production company and why that was kind of like part of the genesis when you set it up.
It was, we created the production company really out of necessity. I was transitioning at that point. I was working as an account executive for Condé Nast. I did a lot of their, you know, marketing campaigns, and it was just one of those things where I'm like, I'm leaving my 20s, and now I'm looking at this going, what have I done? I'm trying to do this acting thing, and there's just no roles available. And even if there is a role, there's so many people auditioning for it, like the John Cho's of the world, that I'm like, I'm having a difficult time. And, you know, the reason why we created it was, well, you know, it was to really take control of the future for me. I've never been one to just sit and wait. And at that point, I felt like I waited far too long. And I just said, you know what? I'm just going to do something for me. And the one thing I learned growing up was that failing is something that is a result of trying. And you know, if I didn't try towards a goal, that I'm just standing still, and then I have no reason to complain because that's all on me. And that's the purpose of it. I wanted to find another way to exercise a lot of this pent up creative energy. And I found an outlet, which was directing and producing. And, you know, within a year, we were directing commercials for like MGM and other brands that liked a lot of the work that we were producing and that I was directing. And then from there, it just kind of took off. And what I took from that experience was understanding that acting is really just a small part of the storytelling process of filmmaking, and understanding what the responsibilities are for a producer, a line producer, a director, even just the creative part, art direction, wardrobe, all of those things really, there's a light that was shined on it. And now it really informed me as an actor. And I felt like it really just strengthened the foundation of what I was doing, and having a little bit more grace for the process, and understanding that, you know, we as actors in some ways are the anchors for this huge marathon that's being run. At the beginning of the race, it's a person who has the idea of the concept, and then they've run that first leg of writing it, and then they pass on the baton to a producer who then tries to create this thing, which then passes it to the director who creates the visual aspect of it, and the production designer and everything else. And then the actor gets that baton, and everybody who ran that race before is now hoping and praying that you finish this race and don't stumble. And that's how I see it now, is that everyone is connected by a string, and it is this marathon race that we all are part of. And yeah, it's really just, it boils down to control. I wanted to control. I wanted to see myself and to be able to produce things that I visually like, and maybe that in the future I could put myself in. But really just exercising that muscle of creativity too is what was important for me.
And you're in production in something right now as well, working behind the camera. And I was just interested in kind of like how that's been going and how you've had to kind of reimagine and rethink the way that you work stepping back into production as we start to gradually open up a little bit.
I was fearful at first, you know, like everybody else. I just didn't know what the new way of producing was going to be. We just produced and shot a short just to see. I mean, this really, we've been sitting around for a while. You know, eventually the creative juices start to come out and you're like, okay, we gotta do something. But yeah, it's a different approach. I mean, we're looking at things that are far more contained, smaller scenes. We're not looking for big expansive things in terms of the stuff that we're shooting. So, you know, if a client comes in and says, hey, we want to do something for example, like Nike or whatever it is, you know, can you guys come up with a concept for this particular marketing strategy? And we'll look at it and say, okay, how can we make this simple so that A, it's safe for everybody to shoot on, and B, that it still achieves the, you know, the goal that the client wants to achieve. You know, again, this is for commercials, but it's the same thing with narratives. You know, the narrative that we shot is just two people in a dining room or in a cafe, and they're just talking, and it's something that we could shoot, and it's simple and doesn't require a lot of crew, and it's shot out, you know, in a space that it's safe, and we just proceed forward. And I think that's the thing, right? It's just, you know, you talk about fear and fearing what might happen if you do it, but also being mindful of that fear and still executing it and making sure that you adhere to the creative, you know, story that you're trying to tell.
That's so wonderful to hear. And I want to thank you so much for diving so much into your character and into talking about your production company and all the incredible work that you've done. And I hope that everyone watching, if they haven't already, binged the hell out of Helstrom on Hulu after watching this interview.
Yeah, I really hope everyone out there gets a chance to watch it. You know, it's a slow build, but it seems like the audiences have been really receptive to what we've been doing. And I really hope that everyone gets a chance to watch it.